I got a Prosport oil pressure gauge that I'm going to be putting in the BRZ. I'm going to try to explain it in a way where I basically explain the purpose of what I'm doing. So that way it will be kind of helpful for any car or any gauge, because there's going to be slight differences. The way I'm doing it, I'm going to be using these. So this is a fuse tap, or it's also called an add a fuse, some people call it. But what this does is that it plugs into your fuse box, add an extra fuse to it so that you can add wiring into another circuit that's already in the car. And this is a little more safer way than just splicing to a random wire that you find. And honestly, I think it's just a neater job overall, because this will nicely plug in rather than just chopping wires. So your gauge that you get, one, depending on what you're actually measuring. So this is an oil pressure gauge. So all the wiring and like sensors related to it are going to be related to oil pressure. So plugging that part will be slightly different, but the wiring to actually power this will be pretty much the same. There's slight differences depending on what, I guess, features it has. So for this gauge, this is the main power harness, I guess. This end goes into the gauge, and now these wires here are where all the power goes into. So at this part, it might be slightly different for each gauge. So the red one's going to be for a constant 12 volt, meaning that the power is always going to go to this wire no matter if the car's on or off. The white one's probably going to be the ignition 12 volt, meaning it only gets power when the car is on. The orange one, this one, I think this one is going to be for the dimmer. So that means when you turn on, so at nighttime basically, when you turn on the lights, the brightness on this on the face here will dim a bit, just so you know, nighttime it doesn't blind you. The gauges might not have that, and honestly in this video I'm probably not going to be using that. So if I just don't connect it, it just means that my gauge won't dim at night. So in terms of wiring, that's going to be pretty common for all gauges. It's going to be pretty similar. This gauge actually comes with this little, I forgot what it's called, a piggyback, I think. So this one, if you want to get another gauge, like say a Prosport old temp gauge, instead of powering both gauges, you can just power one gauge, and then this one will just connect to this gauge and then directly to the next your oil temp gauge, and then the same cable will power both. This is not needed if you just have one gauge. Now this one is more specific to the oil pressure gauge. So this is the sensor, well, this is the cable for the sensor that will actually read the oil pressure. And then this kit comes with like a pretty cheap universal stand, which I'm probably going to use for now because I haven't figured out where I actually want to mount the gauge in my car. So now for my car, I needed this adapter which converts one of the threaded holes in my engine into a little smaller hole, which is needed for the actual sensor to fit in. And the last thing is the actual fuses. I just ended up buying a whole box of them. These things take 2 fuses. So one's going to be what's already on your car, and the other one's going to be the new fuse that you're going to be putting for this. I have 3 of them. I need 1 per wire. So since I said I'm going to probably skip the orange dimmer, I'm only going to be using 2. So 1 for the red wire and 1 for the white wire. Got the multimeter ready to go. So first thing, you're going to have to find the fuse box. So on a BRZ, you got 1 in the engine bay and then 1 right under here. So if you find these buttons over here, it's right under there. But this is the one I'm going to be using because it has a lot of accessories attached to it. So obviously, depending on your car, if you're using this video for a different car, you're going to have to find or just Google where the fuse box is, and then pretty much follow the same steps after that. So on the BRZ, there's a little box that's about this wide. This is the cover that I already took off. So I think it was like this underneath. Pull on this tab to just unlock it and it'll pop off. And then you can see on this cover itself, it actually labels all the fuses that's in there. Coming down here. So right there, that's the fuse box, and you can see there's 3 rows. So just comparing that to the actual cover that's on top, you can see the 3 rows pretty much, and they just use kind of acronyms to describe everything like stop, DRL. So if you don't have a multimeter, I guess you can kind of figure out what to plug in with the names, but the names are not easy to understand if you haven't seen them before. So that's why I'm using the multimeter to see which of these have, you know, the 12 volt and which one have the ignition 12 volt. And then all these ones that line across are just blank. I'm just gonna go with the multimeter and figure out which ones I'm actually gonna tap into. Alright, I've been under here for a while, and I think I've chosen the spots I'm gonna go tap into. I'm gonna try to explain how I read the multimeter and like what I was exactly testing. So just to skip to the end, what I decided was, see these 2 blank spaces? Both of those are constant 12 volts, meaning that even when the car's off, they're getting power to those 2. So I'm gonna use that for basically my red wire on the gauge. And then what I'm going to do is use this one here, the second from the bottom, that 15A. It says P point number 2. So what that is actually the cigarette lighter that's inside my glove box, and right now it's actually plugged into my dash cam. So because the dash cam doesn't use too much current, I'm fine with kind of tapping into that circuit, and that way my other cigarette lighter is right here, so I'm gonna keep that open just in case I need to plug in like a air pump or something, and I'd rather just keep that circuit fully open. So that way that's going to be my ignition 12 volt, and that's going to go to the white wire. Alright, I'm going to explain to you how I basically tested the fuses to see which ones are the actual ones I want. So this way, if you have a different car or you already have stuff plugged into those fuses for some reason, you can kind of test it on your own. Before going onto there, what I was doing, I took the ground for the multimeter and I was just touching this screw right here, so it's kind of easy to reach. So I was just holding one hand right here the whole time, and then with the other one, on the top of the fuse there are 2 exposed metal ends, and you can just kind of touch the tip with it, and on the multimeter you'll get either a reading of 0 or you'll get 12 volts. And that way I went through each of them to see when the car was off which one was getting 12 volts, and when the car was on which one was getting 12 volts. This blue one is the one I chose for the ignition. So right now the car's off, so when I touch it, the multimeter is actually just reading 0, but when I turn the car on and touch it, it reads 12. And then for the blank one is over here, so when I touch it, even when the car is off, it still reads 12. When the car is on, it still reads 12. The spots that already have a fuse, you can either touch the left side or the right side. There's 2 exposed ends, so you can touch either side to read the 12 volts because it's a complete circuit, so the volts are on either end. But on these blank ones, when you're touching them, the power will only be detected on either the left or the right. So you're gonna have to test the right side with the car on and off, and then test the left side with the car on and off. And also remember which side is the side that's getting the power, because that's going to determine which way you face the fuse tap in, and it has to be the right way. On this car, it's always on the side facing, like pointing towards the passenger, so the side pointing towards the driver door is the negative side, so it doesn't get power. Check if you can to be safe. So honestly, the testing of the fuse is probably the most complicated part, because that's the part you don't want to really get wrong. But I mean, if you own a BRZ, at this point I did the work for you. So just again, I'm going to be going into this 15A down here, and then this blank spot over here. For the fuses, what I'm going to be doing is for both of them, I'm probably going to just do the 5A fuses. The gauge itself is probably not going to use a lot, so 5A should be fine. And I probably should have mentioned this at the start, but these are mini low profile fuses. Same with these things. So this actually has to match the shape of your fuse. So the bottom legs are the same shape as the fuse that you're using, because this has to plug into the fuse box. And so when you buy this, these come in different shapes too. So this has to be a low profile mini, and then these have to be low profile mini fuses for the BRZ. This is specifically for the BRZ. If your car is different, the shape might be different. So these are the instructions that come with my gauge. On the pressure one, you can see the red wire is going to be the constant 12 volt. The black one's going to be ground, and the white one's going to be accessory. That's the same thing as me saying ignition 12 volt. And the orange one is dimming light. Now I got my 2 fuse taps and then the 2 5A fuses. So plugging this in, it doesn't matter which way you do this. So like I said, once you're testing the fuse box and you figured out which side is the side that's powered, so I said the left, you gotta test the left and the right, you gotta match this up in relation to that. So once you figure out which side is your powered side on your fuse box, the side further away from this wire is gonna be the powered side, and then the other leg is gonna be going towards the ground. So once those are plugged in, power's going to come through here, and first if you're tapping into, so for example I'm doing the 15, I'm tapping to the 15, so the 15 is going to be in front, so the power's going to go into the 15 and out and back to whatever it's plugged into. So in my case is the cigarette lighter, and then the power is also going to go and split into the back fuse, go into this wire, and then going to your gauge. And then the gauge is going to be grounded, so the gauge circuit doesn't have to come through here. That will be grounded separately with the black wire on the gauge. These don't have a positive or negative end. This shouldn't matter which side you put it, but it does matter once you plug this into the actual fuse box. Got the fuses set up, so this one is going to go into the blank spot. So that's why I don't need another second fuse here. This one is going to this 15, so I pulled it out and I stuck it right here at the bottom, and I'm gonna go wire these ends first before actually plugging this into the fuse box. Now this end, the red wire on this cable is gonna go into this one, and the white one is gonna go into this one. Now obviously you can see this wire is not that long, so if I were to actually put this, the plan is to put it somewhere around here. So if, for example, it's sitting up here, this wire is not gonna reach down to the fuse box. Find some wire and then extend these. I wired it up. It's really messy and ugly, but I totally forgot I had to extend these, and I didn't really have any nice wire or clips. So I'm gonna do this, just taped up for now, just to get this working. But just to explain what is happening here. So this one attaches to the red wire here. Next one to the white wire that was here. And last one, ignore this wire. The wire I had was just like two wires attached to each other, so I didn't really disconnect it. But this last one goes all the way to the black wire, which was the ground. So these ones are going to be plugged in exactly where I mentioned before. And now this one, which is the black ground wire, this one can be connected to pretty much any ground source, which I think if I go down here. So what I'm going to try to do is unscrew this bolt right here and ground that wire under it and just tighten it on it. And I think this should work because I think it's metal back there. I'm just going by feel because I can't stick my head down there. If everything powers on, we know that works. If not, then I'll just find something else. So I'm going to be plugging into this open gap right here. And when I tested it, the 12 volts come in from this side. I don't want to say left or right because I don't know which way the camera's facing now. But everything's upside down for me. Okay, put this one in. You can see my ground wire is attached to that screw. Again, this is just to check if this works. I really wouldn't drive with this setup like this. So yeah, make sure it's a lot better than what this is. Gonna place this one right here. So car is off, so that's not gonna be on. Both 12 volts are connected and the ground, and then again, this dimmer one, the orange wire I had, not needed to work. That's just an added feature. So hopefully now, if I start this, there you go. Nice. I haven't plugged in the sensor yet, so it's not really getting any reading. It's getting the power it needs, and then if you turn the car off, it's off now, and the power should go. I'm leaving this thing loose as well, just because I can adjust the height later once I decide where to put it. I have no idea where I'm mounting it yet, but I just wanted to see this thing work and make sure I know where I'm hooking up everything. And next up is going to be actually putting in the sensor so this can actually read something. Before I go out to the engine bay, let me just explain some of this parts because this confuses a lot of people. So this part I have here, I bought separately from the actual gauge. It doesn't really come with it. And sometimes also doesn't even come with a sensor. So this one does come with a sensor, so you have that. But the thing is, the end of the sensor, which is the thread of this that screws into your engine, if your engine has a hole that's the exact size and exact thread, then you're good. Now this is BRZ specific, so this is an adapter so that I can actually plug this into the engine. So on a BRZ, there's three main options that you can kind of go with in terms of installing the sensor. First thing you can do is what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is using, so right beside the, what is this, the AC compressor, there's a little plug down there. There's a plug that just plugs the hole that does absolutely nothing. It's just a hole there. So that's why I like this option of using that, because it's not going to interfere with anything. The next option would be using a sandwich plate, which is just like a little spacer that goes underneath the oil filter. And some companies sell this thing where you put it in and it'll have a thread built into it that you can just screw this onto it. And last option is, I think it's here. So those are the OEM temperature and oil pressure sensors. So those ones, you can buy adapters that basically screw into those holes and then add like an extra hole, so it'll split the hole into two, so you can put back the OEM ones as well as add this on. I don't want to mess with any OEM stuff, so that's why I like using that plug that's not really being used. And the reason I need this is because you can see, so the end with the white stuff on it is an M12 by 125, I think, which is what that hole is. And then it converts it into that smaller hole, which this can screw onto. So this is a, okay, so it doesn't say the M12, but so it says Subaru EJ engines. That's the WRX and STI engines. So those have a hole with the exact same thread, even though these just say EJ, it works for the BRZ, but it converts it into a 1/8 NPT. So that's the one you want. I'm pretty sure like 99% of all these sensors use that thread, and some cars just don't have that exact thread. The one over here for the OEM stuff are 1/8 I think, but they're not NPT. There's something else, so it won't actually work. That's why you need some kind of adapter for that as well. This thing was just under 20 bucks I think in Canadian, so you can get this for way cheaper for sure, just buying like a generic one, but this was just easier at this point. The only thing you want to make sure is that if you're getting one of these generic ones, make sure you have some kind of coating on the threads, or you add it yourself. That's just going to help with sealing it from leaks. You can see even this thing has an orange kind of coating on the threads, so yeah, just make sure you add that if yours doesn't come with it. Just before I screw the sensor in, I'm just gonna run the wire again. I just like to do the wiring first, so you can leave that here. So for the wiring, so this one end is obviously going to plug into the sensor, the other end is going to plug into the back of the gauge, so we're going to have to run the wire from here into the car. And right back here in front of the driver's seat, there's a spot where all the wires go into, so you can just kind of find a way to squeeze it through the little grommet over there. I got my sensor wire ran, so this is the end where the sensor is going to plug in. The wire goes, I just tucked it under some of these things, and then it comes all the way to this corner. There's this one, and so in this corner what I did, so on this rubber grommet there's this part that's sticking out for whatever reason. It's like a long cylinder, so what I did, it's not being used by anything, I poked a hole in the top of it and shoved the wire through. This actually was a lot harder than I thought. It took me a while just to get a hole on there, and I greased the wire so that it could slip through. It was actually pretty hard, so it might take some time here. I see some people just lift up the edge of this rubber thing and stick the wire through there. I wouldn't do that because then the wire's gonna be against the metal, and I don't know, I would think over time it might cut through the wire, so I'd rather poke a hole through this. And then right behind the fuse box we're working on, that rubber grommet's on this side too, and there's a hole there already, and the wire should come out of there. So this is my wire coming down here, comes up and onto the gauge. So I just have it sitting here loosely for now. I put it in the case it came with, and then back in the front I'm going to take off that plug. I'm at the point where I'm about to screw in the sensor, but I'm just having a little bit of issues. But let me explain what I did so far. So this was the plug that was screwed into the engine over there where that golden piece is right now, and then I replaced it with that adapter I bought, so that's screwed in now. And then now my sensor, oh actually also just to mention, I took this intake pipe, I just loosened the clamps on both ends and pulled it out just to give me space, because I initially tried to use an Allen key to take this out and I needed the space, but the Allen key didn't work. This thing is tight on there, so I had to go buy like a hex socket head to get that off. Managed to get it in. I just kind of took this zip tie around those wires back there and just pulled it to the side as I screwed that in, and now it should be tight. I already plugged in the wire too, so you can see now adapter, sensor, and the wire, and then wire's going in. I'm gonna put this stuff back on, and then at this point it should be working. I'm just gonna try the ignition first without actually starting the car. As soon as I turn on the car, I'm also gonna go outside to check any of the screws are leaking. Okay, it's reading a pressure. Let me just go outside. Good news is that it works. Bad news, it's leaking. That's why I said to check it as soon as you turn it on. It's hard to tell, but all that dark stuff is oil. I'm not sure yet if it leaked from the adapter at the bottom or the sensor, so let's see. I fixed the leak. It was just a sensor. I just didn't tighten it enough, so it's fine now. I think I'm gonna go drive the car to make sure it's actually fine, but I did let it run for a while and I was checking it and it looks fine. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't think there's any other thing other than I gotta clean up my stuff. So for now I just got it duct taped. I mean, it's not DIY if there's no duct tape. So I got it duct taped for now until I figure out which way I'm gonna mount it. And I still want to drive it for like a week, make sure there's still no leaks. One thing I probably should have mentioned earlier, for the BRZ, it's a good idea to get a gauge and the sensor if you're buying it separately for whatever reason. But get ones that go up to 150 psi like this one. The car sees like a max of 120-ish psi. Other than that, I still have to install an oil cooler on my car. So once I do that, this gauge will be properly mounted and properly wired, and then I can give an update if this, you know, held itself together. But you can see that video once that's up.